Let's talk about you and me. Let's talk about the things we can't see. Let's talk about 1, 2, 3 and how life is supposed to be. You are safe with me, so hear me out. There's so many things that we can talk about. So hear me out.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to episode 5 of Hero Me Out. This is Hero, your host, and together with me, I have he's kind of a big time. He's an assistant professorial lecturer at the Department of Political Science and Development Studies at De La Salle University, Manila. He is a PhD candidate in public administration at Shanghai Jiao Tong University, and he has written papers on political ideologies, international relations, and local politics. He teaches courses on citizenship and governance, cinema and politics, global development, and Philippine politics. He is also a co-host of the PI podcast, which discusses political issues in the Philippines. Let's all together welcome Mr. Matthew David Ordonez. Hey, Matt.
Hello, hero. Thank you for that introduction. Although I kind of feel like the pressure now, since you made me like a big time, and I'm gonna have to, fill up the shoes that you gave me.
Well, you should already have felt the pressure to begin with, anyways.
Because Hero Me Out is really one of the biggest podcasts. I feel like so honored to be here.
Uy, grabe. Mas maganda. I've
no,
been
it's
listening to your podcast. Wait, please plug your podcast this early on.
Oh yeah, please listen to the PI podcast. It's on YouTube, Spotify, and Anchor. But of course, don't forget to stay tuned to the Hero Me Out. That our podcasts are friends. Yeah,
Wow,
clearly.
amazing.
Yeah.
Thanks, Matt, for that plug sa podcast ko rin. So basically, you don't necessarily have a mental illness, but I'm having you as a guest here. Why is that?
Okay.
Can you explain to me why for some odd reason you found your place here in the podcast?
What a very odd question. So you're asking me why you have me on the podcast?
Wag mo
It,
naman sabihin yan, nire-reveal mo ako.
no, well,
Okay,
to be
go.
honest, okay, well, I am not a okay, that's another thing. An old term for is mental patient or someone with a
Yeah.
mental disorder. At least not that I know of. I could have, but I'm not aware of it yet. But I am, as you've introduced me I'm a professor of political science, and I do teach today's generation. And what I have noticed is quite a number of them have already experienced or have been diagnosed with mental health illnesses, mental disorders, whether it
Mm.
be
Yeah.
bipolar, quite common. They have attention deficit
Yeah.
disorder. They have
Depression,
de-
anxiety.
very much, like general anxiety disorder and depression are the most common, which is weird.
Yeah.
But I think overall in the country they're about 5%, so that's a lot. Um,
Mm.
and I think a bit closer to home, um, my mom recently became a what's that pastoral counselor. So she is a mental health professional,
Oh.
and she has all actually she tells me a lot, although she's actually not allowed to talk about the client. So she keeps them anonymous, but she does also tell me like how her day was and the kind of cases, and
Yeah.
they're actually getting more and more, common and more stressful. There are also people like she handles kids like as old as well
Yeah.
as old as you and my students. There are
Yeah.
people who are with broken marriages. There are people with
Mm.
suffering from trauma from like say deaths of loved ones. So something
Yeah.
as simple as that. I mean, so it's very broad, but it's pervasive in everyday life. I mean, to be honest, like I am quite I mean, sobrang wala akong kabalay-malay. I mean, parang okay lang, chill ako bilang tao as a person. But like with all this happening around me, it's hard to ignore. And
Yeah.
even
Eh,
honestly, I just remembered now, even my closest friends, like one of them, keeping them anonymous, they just admitted to me that they had bipolar disorder.
mm.
And it's weird because we don't really talk that much anymore because we got into a lot of fights, and a lot of the time it's he kind of blames it on that. And so I try to be civil and understanding, but it's very difficult to handle
Yeah.
or be with someone like that. So it's almost very unavoidable, especially when the pandemic is has in a way
Yeah.
aggravated, if not caused, a lot of our mental health disorder. I mean, I'm actually
Aggravated and caused based from
yeah.
my research. That's for
Okay,
sure.
there we go. Actually, I'm surprised I don't have one already. It might be coming,
Yeah.
Baka delay, naka-delay lang, di ba? Darating pa.
Sana hindi.
Oo,
Hopefully
naka-traffic
not.
lang. Hopefully
Yeah.
not, but it's just so overwhelming sometimes. So it's good that we can have a
Yeah.
chance to talk about it.
Thank you, Matt. This basically leads me to say that I invited you as a guest
Mm.
simply because the topic that we're going to be having for this episode isn't just the same as the other episodes that we've already had, because we're now going into the more technical part of the episodes, more technical part of mental health with regard to policy. So,
Mhm.
would you tell me about the policy here in the Philippines regarding mental health?
Okay, well, first of all, I think we have to anyway discuss like what do we mean by mental health, because
Yeah.
a lot of the things that we talk about mental health, they refer to many different things. Sometimes people
Yes.
call like learning disorders, like attention deficit,
Mm.
uh, having difficulty with focus. Sometimes it's dyslexia, and then there are also depression. They're actually they're the way we deal with these different conditions are very different. So you have to have different sets of policies for said condition, and I think that's it's very difficult to have an overarching policy for this big, precisely because some of these like the statistics that we like to cite, about depression, about anxieties, sometimes these are already symptoms that are way too late. Like
Yeah.
there are the way that we treat even like the mental health industry, and I've actually talked to people in that industry. It's usually we address them when there are already visible symptoms, and sometimes that's
Yes.
in a way,
And by
but
that time,
not
it's
not too late.
probably already too late, right?
We don't want to say too late, because of
Oh,
course
okay.
there you can always like heal and come back to it, but
Yes.
it's already like an extreme condition, and it's not very preventive. So there are two
Yeah.
ways. Either one, you can address the symptoms when they're manifesting already, like what, suicidal tendencies, but that's already very much very late,
Mm,
not too late
yes.
but very late. And then
Yeah.
you have simple things like, for example, like stress can actually cause a lot of other things. Again, I am not a mental health expert, I'm not a doctor, but
Yeah.
based on what I've read, these cause a lot of things. So depending on what you're targeting, those are
Yeah.
different set of challenges. If, for example, so we have to have our definitions clear. Now,
Mm-hmm.
if you let's go keep it simple. If we have like if we're going for the first kind, which is like, okay, there are visible symptoms already,
Yeah.
then you'll need access to, number one, mental health professionals. And I think while there are, and it's funny, it's ironic that psychology is actually like one of the blockbuster courses in college. A lot of people are taking psychology, but
And then,
they
despite
don't
that,
despite that they don't necessarily become mental health professionals, because perhaps there's not a lot of money in that. So I don't know if you
or
have guests.
probably there are a lot of branches that lead to other professions under the
That's
course of psychology, right?
Yes. But so we in a way we need more of them to go into mental health treatments,
Yeah.
counseling, psychiatry, therapy, therapists, etc. That's the weird thing. And I think it's not very common here. It's not an established industry just yet.
Mm-hmm.
You see a lot of movies, you see a lot of TV shows that have like the therapist with their clipboards taking down notes. But this is
Yes.
mostly in the United Kingdom, in the
Yeah,
United
in the
States.
West.
Yeah,
Yeah, but little to no mentions of it or like scenes from it in the Philippines.
exactly. Which is quite sad. I mean, because there aren't a lot, and those who are, again, I can't say for that, but I've heard stories, and well, if you want to have them as a guest, I can float their name on it. But some of my friends actually who are psychology majors, they have noticed that then very they're not always the most qualified. In fact, that's one thing that we also have to establish here. do we have
Yeah.
proper mechanisms to license these mental health professionals? Are they always up to par? And
Yes.
and even if we do have these licensures or these quality control systems, do they always work? Like, we have quality control things uh, for professions like teachers and civil servants, but of course they're not always the best. We have
Yeah,
a test.
and
Yeah,
even if we do have these laws or existing
yeah.
tests to determine the quality of the psychologist,
Hmm.
who's to say that these psychologists aren't vulnerable to getting a mental health illness themselves,
Oh,
right?
definitely. Like, I don't want to say, well, it's very difficult to say this, but a lot of the times, based on their profession, they themselves could get like stressed, bogged down. They could have depression.
Yes.
So it's not, well, it could also be contagious, but not. Well,
Yeah.
it's problematic to say that, but again, it does affect their own health. So
Yeah.
you have to care not only
Sometimes
for.
getting too much mental health patients or attending to too many patients can be overwhelming.
Yeah, I mean, in some sense, they are a lot like the frontliners during the pandemic, the nurses
Yes.
and the doctors. They can get sick themselves. You know, it can wear them down. So
Yeah.
if we can't do that for the frontliners of the general practitioners of the nurses,
Mm-hmm.
what more with the mental health professionals? We can't exactly trust them just yet to
Yeah.
take care of them. So that's another thing. But the other kind, which is more preventive, and I think this is more complicated. Sometimes before you actually have it, before sometimes you need coping mechanisms. Like, so
Mm-hmm.
sometimes you would promote things like meditation or cleanliness. So actually, that's the thing. Sometimes mental health can be caused by genetic factors. So these are
Yeah.
things within your family tree. My
Yes.
mom, actually, she usually, when preparing for pastoral counseling, she had to look at her own family tree, and she discovered there are a few, let's see, underlying conditions that are inherited genetically. And that's
Yes.
for a lot of our clients as well. It's sometimes springs from, like, something in the brain, something clinical,
Yeah.
hormonal imbalance, or sometimes behaviors. Like, some certain anxieties come from, like, parents
Mm-hmm.
being overly violent or overly
Yeah.
uh, temperamental. Um, so there's that, but there's also sometimes, um, on the other hand, you have things like stress. Just
Yeah.
just stress, like
The
just
other
being
external
overworked.
factors.
Yeah,
Yeah.
or sometimes it can be caused by traffic. You know, traffic can cause like a lot of rage. So w- the the weird thing is that these kinds of things, you can also do that. You can also have, even if you don't have a mental health a diagnosis,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
you can have these things that can alleviate it. Like, for example, things like playing sports, having sports fest, although
Yes.
at least that's more
Exercise.
possible now.
Yeah.
Sometimes you can have, well, sometimes having a cleaner environment can actually improve your mental health,
Mm-hmm.
or having people bond as a community. So that's a weird thing. Sometimes you have these diagnoses, and you have, even before you have the diagnosis, you can have, yeah, just making sure things work. The weird thing is that you talk about mental health policy, but mental health, again, these conditions are sometimes a symptoms of your environment. A friend, again, I talked to a few psychology majors. They said
Yeah.
that we have psychosocial conditions, when a lot
Mm-hmm.
of it is based on your environment, your society. Sometimes have being anxious about the pandemic,
Yes.
having, or
Definitely.
natural disasters, or
Definitely.
simply being exposed to an area with crime. You're anxious that you might get robbed or raped.
Mm.
That
It contributes to the stress.
Yes. So sometimes, in terms of policy, making sure all other aspects of the government can actually help with your mental health, knowing that you
Oh,
won't get robbed.
yeah, so
Yeah.
that's what actually makes it more complicated because
Yes.
more than just creating a mental health policy itself,
Hmm.
there are also other policies that externally affect the mental health policy, right?
Right.
And
Hmm.
then it also needs a better and more firm implementation for us to be able to finally be able to say that, oh, this mental health policy, this is going to work.
Yeah. It's funny. Across whether mental health or not, a lot of policies are like really good on paper. Like it's based on research. I
Mm,
know a few researchers in government working for senators.
yeah.
They know their stuff. But the
Yeah,
problem is
but the
a lot of things,
execution isn't.
yes,
Yeah.
implementation is complicated. And
Mm-hmm.
so even if you have these, a lot of things are being done right now. Like for example, there are now mental health hotlines. There are mental health
Mm-hmm.
professionals and counseling. Like for example, notable example, the office of the vice president, they offer telecounseling for people suffering from mental illnesses like
Yes.
anxiety and depression. And a lot of this is for free, which is great. Uh, but again, this a lot of it has to do with like even if you have these hotlines, then uh,
Who's to say that you're able to, or who's to say that everyone in the Philippines who needs it are able to avail of it, since it's just free and it's just a hotline and it's
yeah,
the resources are very limited.
right. Or there's still that internal shame and of course I think you may have talked about this before, stigma. Like the
Yes.
moment that someone calls or dials or even seeks out help, there's this makes bakit may ano ka ba? And the fact that we
Mm-mm.
have even in our common language, sa salita namin parang may topak o may
Yeah.
tililing. May tililing
Yeah.
yung tao. Bakit may tililing ka ba? And I think our culture, I think I've talked about it in my own podcast, where the movie Tililing, people got mad at it. But at the same time,
Yeah.
of course, the people that got mad at it were educated, middle class, upper
Yeah,
class.
I think I've heard of it as well.
Yeah,
That's by Daryl Yap, I
by
think.
Daryl Yap. Yes,
Yeah, yeah.
and this, and technically, we still don't have the language to talk about these things. And in a way, Daryl Yap point this out.
Yeah.
He's not he's infamous and it's not liked, but I actually appreciate this particular work because it actually revealed to us how society treats mental health. If you actually
Yes.
watch the movie,
Yes,
it's
definitely.
actually it's a social critique of the way that we do it. It's I mean
Yeah.
the fact that the move if you talk about the movie, again, this is not necessarily a recommendation, but I'm telling you what happens in this movie. It's you put them in mental institutions to be
And
looked
then,
at behind bars, and that's actually kind of problematic. You remember, like in popular culture, like if you
mm,
watch the Batman, there's this thing called Arkham Asylum, and
yeah.
all the villains and bad guys are placed there because they're insane, and the
Yeah.
insane are literally for the bad guys. It's the same thing in way here, and that's technically, well, it's an old attitude, but it reflects an existing one nonetheless.
Yeah.
So I think
About the
it.
perceptions of the Philippines regarding, and many Filipinos regarding how they view mental health as of the moment.
Uh-huh. I do remember the story that I think was the theology professor of mine. In a way, yeah, he actually said that before, because they didn't have that language of dealing with
Mm,
mental health or describing it. Sometimes when someone is showing aggression or like
yeah.
scratching themselves, they would
Mm,
go tie them by the neck in the leash outside their house as if they were a dog. So this happens, of course, in Africa, but in the Philippines here as well. Sometimes they put them in a cage.
yeah, we've recently talked about that.
Yeah.
There was this co-hosting stint that I did with
Yes.
a person
Right.
who was inclined in the media and works
Mm.
for Jessica Soho.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, the mental health, that's one of our topics that we
Mm.
discussed. And she mentioned that one of her episodes included crazy woman who was tied up in the middle of a forest because she was crazy, and because um a lot of people thought that she was like may
Mm-hmm.
trililing, whatever you
Mm-hmm.
call it.
Yeah.
But then when the media came there and when she came there, they all realized that the illness that she was going through, it was actually a curable illness,
Mm-hmm.
that all of the people around the person who was tied up didn't
Ye-
even realize.
yes.
That's why they tied her up in the middle of the forest. But
Right.
now, fortunately, the person is already recovering and she's already receiving the necessary medicines that
Right.
she need for her recovery.
Mhm.
And it sounds crazy, and it sounds absurd when we talk about this in 2022, but
Mhm.
yes, it's true. It still happens
Yeah.
here in 2022 in the Philippines, and that's what's sad.
Yeah. And sometimes when you have that person behaving erratically, you don't call the mental health professional. You call, sometimes they call a priest, and they would have
Oh
them
yeah.
exercise them to use holy water.
Oh yeah.
And while of course I'm a Catholic, I believe in the power of the priest and God and all that and
Yeah.
demons and all. Sometimes you kind of have to make that distinction. You have to investigate first.
Yes.
If
Yes.
medicine fails, you can bring in the priest, but maybe medicine might
Yeah.
be the better thing. Yeah.
To do first.
Yeah.
Yeah, before even consulting with the priest, because I know, I get it. A part of our culture includes like the culture of the indigenous people, where
Mm.
you conduct exorcisms
Yeah.
and the like.
Right.
But then I think now, with the more humane solutions, I think we should go more with a scientific aspect
Yeah.
before we actually start going to the back to the exorcism and consulting with the priests and all.
Right.
But the thing is, that's also the problem still. A lot of people, other than just their lack of awareness on mental health,
Mm.
there is also this lack of resources for it. Mental
Mm.
health is expensive. Mental
Mhm.
health medicines and
Yes.
everything, and even the geographic location. We're an archipelagic country,
Right.
which means there are a lot of places that are remote and r- cannot access
Yeah.
these mental health resources immediately.
Mhm.
That's why they sometimes tend to opt with the absurd solutions, like tying them up in the middle of the forest
Yeah.
and all.
The weird thing is that it's difficult to discuss this in terms of policy because this is a common problem with policy, policy sciences, political science.
Mm.
Like sometimes you cannot like legislate a culture or an interface because
Mm.
mental health is something so ingrained and so sometimes it's so personal. Like it is on the individual. Like in a way, in order for you to be
Yeah.
treated, you have to be number one, well, helped by have a proper family that will let you be treated, but sometimes number two, you let yourself be treated. But
Yeah.
you have before that you have to be aware. And sometimes when a government increases awareness about something, they're not always successful. So the
Mm.
first step, but so in a way, instead of having a top-down policy-based mainstreaming, you need to have maybe something bottom up. Like sometimes this may not be the role of the government here. In a way, you need maybe you have to start with number one schools or maybe
Yeah.
other groups, that to create that culture of like of getting treatment or getting
Yeah.
or treating people well, maybe even if it's not getting diagnosed, respecting people who have been
Yeah.
diagnosed
And
you know
even getting to know mental health
yeah.
itself, for those who are still
Mhm.
need more education about
Yeah,
mental health.
I'll give you an example about how mental health has been politicized. Like two
Mm.
two examples. Number one, uh, Miriam Defensor Santiago, which was actually a popular candidate back in 2016,
Yes.
but she first ran for president in 1992. Actually, when I was born, actually the date
Yeah. Oh.
it was their elections, and she was very popular, and she almost became the president, but what stopped her was this smearing and negative campaign that she's Brenda or brain damaged because
Oh.
she was so smart that at that time
People were
intelligence
thinking that she
yes,
was crazy.
she was
What?
crazy, which
That's
in a way if you
absurd.
if you watch her, like she kind of acts kind of crazy, but that doesn't mean she has a mental illness.
Yeah.
So that actually cost her a lot of votes. So that's why we have Fidel Ramos, who is a winner. Well, I don't know if he was the one who deployed it. And the second time, I think, just after Benigno Aquino or Pinoy
Mm-hmm.
was declared his candidacy, there recently, I think it was Ateneo who released a document about him visiting the guidance counselor and revealing that he may have perhaps certain anxieties. I forget the exact
Oh.
thing, but apparently this was released to show that he was not, in a way, up like a qualified to be president because
Yeah.
of this visit to the guidance counselor. So the fact that the stigma is real, regardless if they're functional right now or if they've dealt with it,
Yeah.
I think the fact that it has smeared them still is an effect, and that just shows how Philippine society sees mental health.
Yeah, and puts a bad light to it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's crazy stuff.
Do you think the Philippines still needs a wider scope of awareness when it comes to mental health?
That's a weird thing. I am actually conducted research. This is not very much related. This is I'm writing a paper with a colleague of mine on
Mm-hmm.
a thing of resilience, and
Mm-hmm.
resilience is, of course, being able to, uh, even after receiving trauma or psychological like damage, you're still able to bounce back. That's the resilience. You're being able to withstand and endure said psychological stress, maybe sometimes in
Yeah.
disasters. And that is actually been cited by some studies as to why Filipinos do not seek that mental health treatment, because
Yeah.
kaya naman nila.
Mm-mm.
As in, kung kaya ko naman, edi sige. Kasi minsan kasi baka inisip nila, gastos din yon eh. Kasi
Mm-mm.
mahal. The weird thing is
Yeah.
that among the cheapest, among the cheapest sources of counseling is still like what, four or five zeros. It's quite
Yeah.
not very affordable for everyone.
Still not very affordable.
Still not very affordable. Yeah. So um sometimes instead of seeking treatment, they would still endure it, or kakayanin na lang.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is that's but I think that's embedded in our culture, because if you've been if you live in this country, that it's
Mm.
hard to live in this country.
Yes.
So sometimes it does make us stronger. We are able to cope, and
Yeah,
able.
but
Yeah.
also at the same time there comes a certain limit
Yeah.
to it that yeah, we're viewed to be resilient people, but sometimes too much of this resiliency like
Yeah.
puts us in a bad light. Like, are
Sure.
we going to be resilient forever? Like, who's going to help us?
Yes.
Like, right? And then um it's also very intriguing
Yeah.
how um I'm always led to ask whether people or the Filipino people in the Philippines still need a wider scope of awareness,
Mhm.
or is it not awareness that's the problem, but the lack of government or lack of firm government policies or other external factors that needs to be addressed more than just the scope of awareness. That so those are a lot of questions
Yes.
that are intriguing me, and
Hmm.
it's so
Yeah.
sad because they go in circles because they affect
Yes.
each other, no?
Hmm. I mean, on the one hand, sometimes people think that people believe anything on the internet, but that's actually false. People believe what they want to believe on the internet. It's called confirmation bias. That's why you can talk about
Yes.
like fake news, why people believe some
Yes.
fake news and not the mainstream news. But they are actually very cynical and doubtful when you think when you
Yeah.
talk about things like mental health, especially when it comes from like foreign. Because quite frankly, let's be admitted, mental health is a foreign Western discord. Minsan taga states dyan, galing yan sa states, or which
Mm.
is fine. It's not to completely dismiss it, but
Yeah.
I think again, we do not have this embedded culture of like awareness of mental health. It doesn't come from the ground up. So when it
Mm.
comes from somewhere else, we don't really believe it right away. So that stubbornness
Yeah.
kind of has to, be uh, understood and take into account. Which, by the way, I have to say, I'm not always. I also have my doubts with mental health. On the one hand, what I like to believe my students when they use mental health as their reasons for not performing that well. Sometimes there are those people who use it just because, I mean,
Just for clout, even though
just
they don't
just for clout.
really, or they don't necessarily have that mental illness.
Yeah, but also because, and remember, well, this is again the evolution of mental health. Like right now, if you notice, um, there is a for every mental health condition there
Mm.
is a medical treatment, with regards to a regimen of pills
Yes, or
or
either
treatments.
psychological or psycho
I- i-
social.
yes,
Right.
but sometimes this is also being propped up by an industry is benefiting from this, even to the point where sometimes there are medically sponsored uh like talk shows, like sometimes Dr. Phil, or
Yeah.
sometimes TV shows like Euphoria, in HBO, which talks
Yeah.
about the main characters. They admit openly have mental illnesses, which in a way, in some parts, yes, it brings awareness, but at the same time, there are people who might take it the wrong way and say, "Oh, like what you said, cloud chasing. It's cool to have
Yeah.
mental health illness." So that's when that kind of culture can actually muddy it. On the one hand, it can affirm and say that, oh, that character is like me.
Yeah.
So it's okay. So I can seek treatment. Or number two, there are people who might use it as a costume, which is
Yeah.
unfortunate.
Yeah. So
So yeah.
basically it's like a mixture of both, the
Hmm.
positive and the negative. But for
Yeah.
me personally, I think that it's more on the negative side,
Ooh.
all because I feel like the way the Philippines look at mental health is still so primitive to the point that we display a certain mental illness on the media
Mm,
absurdly. Like
mm.
kung like as in as simple as depression, parang ang OA na ng pagko-portray nila sa media, sa
Uh-huh.
film. That's why people are starting to think na if you get like just the slightest amount of mental illness or like the smallest diagnosis,
Hmm.
you already put yourself in a bad light or in a
Mhm.
bad situation, and you view yourself like you're lesser than them.
Uh-huh. Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I mean, that's another thing
Yeah.
entirely. The way that how the Filipino,
Yeah, no.
like Philippine entertainment, doesn't really handle anything properly. Like, I mean, anyway, it's sometimes overly dramatic to the so it's
Yeah.
not. You can't blame it all on the media, but sometimes it's even like if you go on Twitter, yeah, on Twitter,
Mm.
like sometimes they openly talk about like taking this medication, or they've been
Mm.
diagnosed, which again, to a point, yes, it shows awareness. It builds
Yeah.
it makes people feel less alone. But again, people who may not understand as well and may want attention, they could also uh retweet it or copy.
Mhm.
So that's also that we should also work out on that. It's complicated, but I think it's important to develop like a critical culture about this. So it's still very early days. It's very recent. Like for example, again, I mentioned the mental health. No, not mental institutions, mental hospitals. When you look at the states, actually, my dad told me this. He he reads a lot of news in America, and he noticed that
Mhm.
almost all the mental institutions are almost empty. So because people are no longer being detained, they're also being reintegrated in society, which of course, and replacing it with maybe regular consultations with their therapist, as well as, of course, a regimen of drugs, or but and which is good. It offers hope, but at the same time, there is a level of doubt in saying that is it really advisable to have like a lot of these. I mean, perhaps. I mean, it's very complicated. Like there's a whole book of conditions that,
Yes.
like, while there are common things that are completely harmless, take note. A lot of, I mean, a lot of people can. Okay, if you're talking about politics, in the legal system,
Mm.
sometimes they would plead insanity or mental incapacity just to be innocent or to get a divorce.
Oh
So
yeah.
it can be used as again
It's a
a
tool.
loophole,
Yeah.
or yeah, a legal loophole. So that's, it is complicated. It's
Yeah.
not that simple. So if you ask me how to address it, we have to start with, well, maybe we have to focus on each department, because if you lump all these things, we it's just too much.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm.
It's complicated. It's complex. It's convoluted.
I like that.
All
All the
the
cons,
synonyms. Yeah.
no pros. We need to be
Matt.
proactive, prolific. You know?
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
so difficult and it's so sad. Matt,
Mm-mm.
what are your thoughts about the Mental Health Act in the Philippines? This was recently just been
Yeah.
passed into a law. Tama ba?
Mm.
If
Yeah.
I'm not mistaken, correct me if if I'm mistaken. But what are your thoughts about the Mental Health Act?
Well, on on its face, I don't really see anything wrong, because again, uh, a lot of the times, the national level laws, they are meant to be general. They are meant to be as in a way flexible, so
Mm.
that, but there's usually another document comes after that, which is the IRR, which is the implementing rules and regulations.
Yeah.
So, and I haven't looked at that document yet, but at the same time, I don't really know, because the fact that one common problem with any policy is, again, the Philippine structure, and our
Mm.
structure is we are highly decentralized, administratively. Like, for example, we may have a national law, say, yeah, for example, mental health, but it's still up to the local government
Yes,
officials
to be able
to,
to
yeah,
implement it properly.
I mean, if they have, if they have budget for it, or if sure,
Yeah.
that they'll do that. And so I think one of the most more progressive ones is, I think, Quezon City. They do have some counseling. I think even Cavite, they had the hotline during the pandemic. But
Mm.
for the rest, when it's not the priority, when the priority is, say, ayuda, or
Yeah.
actual still treating the pandemic or vaccination, which a lot of them, have difficulty doing, then yeah, it's,
And the
I think,
military.
the military, so the face of the pandemic is the military. It's not nurses, uh
Yeah.
it's not counselors, which sadly we, in a way, we need. So, again, this the I think the more important thing would be mainstreaming. Does it have any mechanisms for mainstreaming, or making the language of mental health normal or
Mm.
functional? Because again, you may have the policy and the, for example, the office, the institution,
Mm.
the service.
But you
If
have the money for it and the
and
resources
Yeah,
and
do we have the money? But again, do people know about it?
yeah, that's
Excuse
also
me.
one thing.
I'll give you an example. Like, it's another related one. It's called Violence Against Women's Help Desk,
Mm.
and these are my students made a research about that, and they have all these things. They have materials, they have ready counselors, but
Mm.
again, people don't go there because, again, stigma. Usually, this is again about like domestic abuse, rape, and women's reproductive health, but they don't go there because, again, number one, they don't know about it, or number
Mhm.
two, even if they know about it, they're ashamed. So it's, again, a lot of it goes back to that stigma, that culture. Because I believe it was, I'm trying to remember, but well, the person I'm about to quote is quite infamous, called Andrew Breitbart, and the politics runs downstream from culture. In other words, culture first, then policy and politics. So, in order for
Mm.
you to have a proper uh, policy on it, there has to be an existing culture about it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we may have, in a way, a culture about it here in the capital, but perhaps those in, like, say, the provinces. I think we need to talk to people about mental health in the provinces. Are there services there? Is it a
Yeah.
yeah, is it an issue there? Are they even talking about it there? Are there, like, for example, Bisaya or Hiligaynon or Kapampangan, words for mental health illnesses? Because
Mhm.
again, in Tagalog, tililing, topak,
Yeah. Oo.
may tama.
Yeah.
So, which indicates damage, but of course, ridicule. Like, pinahihiya namin, pag may tililing yan. Parang, may
Yeah.
tililing. Oh. So, it takes a long time. And I don't think a policy would be enough. If ever, it needs to, um, again, perhaps provide something for education in schools. But again, that's still not
Yeah.
enough. I think what needs to be done here is when I talked about bottom up, we need like normal people talking about it, you know, like
Normally.
without
Normally.
judgment.
Yeah.
Yeah, like in a way, we are doing more for mental health than a policy
Yeah.
because we are talking about it as if it is not judgmental. It's with importance, with respect. Podcasts like this is supported in mainstreaming.
Now let's go to the next part. Since there's a lot of problems, and there's a lot of solutions, but these solutions are like convoluted for now because
Hmm.
there's a lot of branches to these problems and a lot of
Mm.
other external factors that affect the proper or the more firm implementation of the Mental Health Act. Let's start to dissect all these solutions one by one. First, how do you think mental health, the issue on mental health can be
Mm.
addressed in the media when it comes to constructing policies in the media? What do you think? Me, I think um the way to do it is
Me,
to, kasi
sure.
there are already for your information, there are already a lot of laws, ethical laws that include the mental health in the Kapisanan ng Broadcaster ng Pilipinas, the KBP Code of the
Yes.
Philippines. But then it's still a bit messy because of course how can movies like Trililing still get away with when in fact it's actually puts everyone about the who are suffering about mental illnesses in a bad light. So
Hmm.
how do you think can address that
Uh,
issue?
I don't have a clear answer to that. On the one hand, I am generally for artistic freedom and freedom to explore
Yeah.
um, stories like this. But sometimes you need to, like, I think you always need to have perhaps a proper consultation with a psychologist, a mental health professional, because if you write irresponsibly, you might
Mm.
cause more harm than good. On the one hand, like the example I remember is 13 Reasons Why, which deals with
Yeah.
teen suicide. And there were a lot of copycats because this Netflix series actually depicted the act of suicide like right there, like
Yeah.
for this kind of thing. But yeah, that's there. So the weird I think it's always important to consult a mental health professional when depicting
Yeah,
these
I
stories.
think that's one solution,
Yeah,
no?
I mean, even like I heard even George Lucas consulted a psychologist when he revealed that he was writing, spoiler alert for Star Wars, that Luke's father was Darth Vader, so that could also cause a trauma. Like the father was the bad guy. So even that's not
Yeah,
even like suicide or depression. That's like a dramatic reveal.
yeah.
So I mean, and then there's another thing. Sometimes like there's another pattern in the media
Yeah.
which we have moved on from, which is good, but I think in the Philippines there's still some signs of it wherein we equate again villains with mental illness. Like
Mm-hmm.
sometimes literally well, the Batman, you have Two-Face with dual personality disorder,
Yeah,
you have Riddler with narcissistic disorder, you have Joker with schizophrenia.
yeah.
Each villain represents a different mental health condition in
Illness.
literally
Yeah,
in the book, in the
yeah,
uh, uh but I think um and now I think it's also the protagonist's turn. So I think we have moved on from that. But I think we should also be careful when we associate mental health with character flaws. Like sometimes people equate them, or saying
oh
sometimes they would
yeah.
use again this terminologies to justify shitty behavior. Like, so
Yeah.
I'm anxious, oh, my dyslexia
Mm.
or something, just when they feel.
So
Yeah,
parang it's still messy pa rin, no? Even if
yeah,
we talked about it, just policy in the media.
yeah.
Policy in the media, as simple as that. But then you remember that there are also other more branches in the
Yeah.
media. Like number one, how do you draw a line between artistic freedom and then
Hmm.
putting a bad light to
Yeah.
people who are going through mental illnesses?
Yeah.
And number two, how do you draw a line, another line
Yeah.
between a person who is just portraying that character's behavior with
Hmm.
a person who's suffering through mental illness. So,
Hmm.
yeah, there's a lot of factors that are really difficult to be able to address. Not
Hmm.
until we learn to consult with more mental health professionals.
Hmm. Yeah.
No?
And I suppose also that maybe I'm not sure if the MTRCB has anything to do with that. Maybe the rating system should also include like there are. I don't know if we do that yet, but let's say there are depictions of like violence and of self abuse or
Mm,
something like that. So I mean, the trigger warnings are in a way saturating American society, and sometimes it's being lampooned and made fun of.
yeah.
But maybe here in the Philippines, maybe we need a little bit more, not too much.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm actually very careful with the mental health discourse because the mental health discourse in America is in a way out of control. Like I said, sometimes I think they are popularizing it so that they could earn like to earn money out of it.
Mm,
So so there's a part of it like that. That's why there are some people who anyway are pushing back on it, saying that oh maybe it's like we have to draw a line. We do have a again a culture of resilience, so,
mm-hmm.
which in a way is a good thing or a bad thing. It's a bad thing when you repress something to the point where you're breaking down. That's literally what happened with like Anakin Skywalker and Darth Vader. We talk about the media. In
Yeah.
a way, that's all these negative emotions
Yeah.
were repressed. That's what, and eventually exploded when he became Darth Vader. So that's one of the well, that's one positive depiction. But yeah, I suppose a little bit of like so we have to also be cautious with the way that we popularize. We can popularize it, but not to the point of again it being everywhere, and so and for people to use it carelessly. Yeah, we have to be
Yeah.
careful. Yeah.
Thank you, Matt.
Okay.
Next, we go to mental health policies at school
Mm,
in the area of education. How do you think we can
mm.
implement a better mental health awareness for the people at school?
Mm. That hits home again because I'm a teacher for a
Yeah.
living, and I'm when I started teaching online with a lot of my students who have currently this is not normal for them, and they have a lot of stress, a lot of anxieties, and I suppose I don't know if it is well, for one thing, I have very mixed signals with this one policy, which says a no fail policy. So no matter what happens, we cannot fail them. And sometimes you kind of need to fail them. Sometimes when they know they can't
Yeah.
fail, they don't really perform that well. But
Do
at the same,
anything.
yeah, but at the same time, of course, there are students who do show willingness to perform despite having all this stress. And literally
And that policy.
in the middle of the term, they would tell me that they have just been diagnosed with general anxiety disorder. So, like sometimes I'm shocked. I don't know what to do. So sometimes, um, I think I don't think I was properly briefed on this, quite frankly. So perhaps I hope teachers would be briefed as to know how to handle this.
Mm.
But I do know that well, I did ask this in a forum one time, and I have been told to just direct them to the actual uh, guidance counselor. So that's
Oh, yeah.
I think that's always people forget there's a guidance counselor. So the teachers are
Mm.
only there for the lessons, like the curriculum. But
Mm.
with things like this, again, that's another thing that sometimes they would go to the teachers. They see them as an adult or a role model. So they go to teachers, but no, sometimes you need to go to the guidance counselor. So I think there are mechanisms in place, but in a way, as usual with anything, we always have to be careful whether if it causes more harm than good. Again, like the no fail policy. I think
Mm.
LaSalle has a safe space policy, although I don't know if it's still useful since again it's all online, but
Yeah.
it's a step in the right direction. So Um, yeah,
At least we take it one step at a time, and at
yeah.
least there's something that's keeping the ball rolling regarding mental health.
What I can say is that you cannot mistake the regular amount of stress in college, because studying should really be stressful. You cannot eliminate stress.
Yeah.
Sometimes a bit of stress in a way prepares you for growing up, for the workplace, as it should. That college should do that. So sometimes you cannot always rely on, again, the mental health discourse to protect you from that. That's
Yeah.
that's another thing.
Yeah,
I
so
mean,
that's also what makes it like a bit messy, because at the
yeah,
same time it's also difficult how when people tell you, "Oh, sir, I can't come to class because I'm having anxiety attacks."
yeah,
What the next response that we do would probably be where's your medical certificate? Do you have
oh
any
yeah,
medical
oh
certificate?
yeah,
And then if you ask one, it would force them to think like, if I need a medical certificate, then I feel like I need to go to therapy for quite a
mm,
long time. But then
mm,
it also discredits the fact that you can experience these depressions, these anxieties,
yeah.
while not yet seeking therapy. So how do you
Right.
draw that line between permitting your students to, or excusing your students for those mental health instabilities when they didn't even seek professional therapy yet, right?
Yeah. I mean, honestly, the way I do it is, I mean, normally before the pandemic, I was a bit of a
Mm,
strict stickler for the rules. Like, I always ask for a medical certificate, and but in the pandemic, I try to be chill. Like, okay, like
yeah.
even I need a break sometimes, and I don't always perform well. So sometimes, if I people sometimes people need to cut me some slack. Sometimes, so I cut them some slack in return. But thankfully, most were able to provide documentation. So I suppose that's good, but at the same time, it's also alarming, saying, "Oh, it's real." Damn,
Mm,
I'm so sorry,
yeah.
but thankfully, and that also means that they're taking it seriously. They're mature enough to say, "Hey, this is a serious thing. I can't use this as an excuse."
Mm.
I mean, people have used like the flu as an excuse, and the flu is not as serious, but well, so yeah,
Thank you, Matt.
yeah,
Now we go to the workplace. How do you think
uh-huh.
policies in the workplace can be implemented regarding mental health?
Well, I'm not sure I can say much about this since my workplace is the school.
Yeah.
Uh, I, I hmm, it's just weird. If I can speak about my brother's workplace, I think they just in a way adjusted work hours so they won't feel overworked.
Mm,
So I think right now businesses do have the right attitude, like they're able to listen to demands or
yeah.
requests. I think that's what's important. Um, they should be open to adjusting for the sake of their workers, and
Yeah.
that dialogue should be there. But again, I can't say it because I'm not exposed to a lot of contemporary or conventional workplaces.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's all I can say. As long as they get employees and employers listen to each other, that should be
Mm.
fine.
But me, I thought of one.
Okay.
What about sick leave policies?
Mm,
Do you think mental health issues should be a legitimate use of sick leave policies?
yeah. Again, I
Y-
it really depends on the business, because sick leave policies are, I think, calculated based on how much they're willing to risk having their employees being able to leave.
Yeah.
Because again, it's a business. They're trying to maximize profits
Yeah.
and break, or at least break even. So
Mm.
I'm not sure with the calculations on that, but I think as a business, they do have a prerogative to at least protect themselves. Because if they just give everyone 6 leaves,
Yeah.
yeah, and I suppose I don't think, I mean, adults need to earn, and they at least ethical adults know that they have to give services in return. So yeah, I don't think there would be abuses on that area. In fact, if ever, being able to work gives them relief, a sense of
Mm.
normalcy. Because
Mm.
if you're stuck at home doing nothing, you kind of feel useless, and that even aggravates whatever mental health
Yeah.
you have. Actually, again, maybe perhaps we can talk about this again, but In fact,
Yeah.
I have a hard time. We kind of have a mental health as a label, kind of implies like there's something wrong. It's sickness.
Yeah.
But I think someone would correct me in saying mental every whether good or bad, we all have mental health.
Yeah.
So we in a way I think that's another thing we should do across things is not just talk about it as an illness or when it's bad, but also when it's good. So that's another thing. We have to
Mm.
express our happiness in the same way that we
Yes.
sometimes openly express our diagnoses. Sometimes I do see some of my friends who have diagnosed like depression. They post saying, I'm finally, for example, stopped taking these. My doctor has advised me I've stopped taking my pills or
Yeah.
medication, and that's great. So, sometimes celebrating these can actually send a signal to society saying that, oh, it can be beaten. Sometimes there's a relapse,
Mm.
but sometimes, most of the time, it's again a good thing to see. So
Mm.
I think it's another thing we can balance with the mental health. We need to talk about it as, you know, when do we know that we are healthy
When do we know that we're not?
and know that we're not? Yeah, because most of the time, and even through this in this conversation, we're referring it to illness, which is
Yeah.
might be counterproductive. But
Mm-mm.
sometimes, yeah, maybe if even if someone has a diagnosis, if they're diagnosed like they're better, then great. We have to highlight these stories as well. In fact, hopefully you can find a guest like that,
Mm.
you know. So yeah.
Yeah. Amazing. Thank you, though. Thank you
Uh-huh.
for that. Now let's proceed to the third part of the podcast, which is
Okay.
Heroes the Tea. So,
Mm.
kind of enough with the policy part, but more
Okay.
on your a personal level of mental health, regardless of whether you've gone through a mental instability or mental condition or not.
Mm.
Number, let's start. Number one, what is the most ineffective thing you've done to cope with a mental instability?
Uh, I'd how about instead of the most ineffective, I'll say the second most ineffective. The second most ineffective
Why?
thing is the second is repressing. And I think that is basically ignoring, like doing something else. And I think a lot of people do
Oh yeah.
this. Like, for example, I just listen to like the music I like instead of talking about dealing with the problems, you know?
Mm,
Uh,
mhm.
so, or like pretend it never happened, but eventually it's ineffective because it comes out even bigger and stronger than before. So it's
Yeah.
best to what actually the most effective thing that I do that whenever I have something like really pressing,
Mm,
I journal. And something even it doesn't have to
mm,
be structured. Like I just say what I'm feeling. Or
yeah.
this might be counterproductive as well. Maybe okay, that's the third most inefficient thing, but it works sometimes. Tweeting,
Yeah.
that's the usual thing. The One of the most common ways to deal with like emotional health is to process it, to write it down, to sometimes maybe you can
Mm,
record it. Some people have audio diaries. So it's the same as like gas. It's better out than in. So just let it
yeah.
out, like burp or whatever.
Yeah. I agree.
Yeah. So but the worst thing you can do is ignore it or keep it in, because
Mm,
that's how it gets aggravated. And that's the weird thing. Like professions like, my mom, who was a pastoral counselor, like a lot of her patients really, they they only sought help when they could not deal with it anymore. So it's best if they, and one of the things that she has them do is journal or write what they feel. And
mm,
it's
yeah.
very simple,
But
but
effective.
also effective. But again, simple to do, but hard to actually start.
Yeah.
Yeah. So don't be shy. Just write or let it out.
Yeah, because there's also this fear of like people like
Discovering and
reading.
reading your
Yeah.
diary. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, sometimes people burn after they write it down. So you can do that,
Oh.
but again, that's bad for the environment. So,
Oh,
you know,
so at least you
whatever.
feel
Yeah.
like you've let it out even if
Yeah.
after you burned it.
Yeah.
No.
So that's completely fine.
Okay.
Hmm.
Next, what mental health myth do you find most annoying?
Uh oh, okay. Again, I don't know if this is the most annoying, but top of my head, um, gutom lang yan. And it's very local. And it's really true. Like when people are feeling really down or anxious, it's through food. So you may it and
Mm.
it does provide alleviation. Like the most common food is ice cream, and literally it like there are clinical studies that say that sugar actually reduces cortisol levels, but increases your chances of diabetes. So that's not always the best method. And of course, yeah, weight and all that, heart
Yeah.
disease, etc. So uh, it's actually cultural. Sometimes it's when you stress eat. So yeah, that causes more harm than good. So that's actually a very annoying and very local myth. So
Mm.
yeah, that's
Yeah,
pretty
I
annoying.
agree. I agree. Thank you. Number three, how did the worst day of your mental instability feel like?
Personal question. Well, there are two kinds of. Well, actually, even in my research, when I ask about resilience, there are actually kinds of bad days. One is just a really low, constant, sad thing, and it usually happens well after tapos nabusted ako, which is completely normal. And sometimes you just have to go through it. I journaled there. But the other
Yeah.
thing, sometimes it's about trigger events, like something
Mm.
really bad happening, like like for example, a death of a loved one, or sometimes failing. But and actually, the only time I had, I'll admit, I can admit this,
Mm.
the only time I had a breakdown or anxiety attack was before my thesis defense. And yeah, I think the only way that I can say that to deal with it is the way I got through it was number one. I went to my parents and they talked to me. So it's important to have a
Yeah.
support system, having good friends and parents that are willing to listen to you without judgment.
Mm.
But also to know that even if you fail this one, you know you're still you.
Yeah.
And I think that's anyway that's what they said. Like even if you fail, like 'cause sometimes we say you won't fail, but sometimes
Yeah.
e- even if you fail, it's not the worst thing that will happen. And I
Yeah.
think that's what we can think about other things that happen in our life. Like this bad thing might happen, but this is not you. I mean, even
Mm.
victims, that's sometimes there's a victim mentality that people kind of talk about, and sometimes you call it victim blaming to go against this, like saying, "Oh, I've been traumatized, I've been
Yeah.
attacked, I've been oppressed, etc." But I think we really need to disassociate our identities with, say, these events. I mean, I might not be the best person to say this, since I've not been a victim of these kinds of events, like rape or abuse or harassment.
Mm.
I mean, of course, you have to deal with it, but at the same time, these are not you. These are
Yeah.
not. You can be healed from this. I think that's what a lot of mental health professionals would tell that you can move beyond this, or you can say that this is you, and but you are also still bigger than this. That's another way. Accept that this happened to you, and it's okay. Yeah.
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 It's okay. It makes us human, It
Yeah.
makes us imperfect but still human.
Mm.
And it grounds us.
And it's not our fault. I mean,
Yeah.
if you know that movie, which is maybe might be one of the better, not the best, but the better depictions of, again, therapy, Goodwill Hunting. It's like
Yeah.
one of the healing moments there is like, it's not your fault. It's not your fault. You're just saying it's not your fault every time. So Marvin Williams and was it Matt Damon? Yeah. Yeah. It's not your fault. Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Next, if you could change something about people's perception about mental health, what would it be?
I don't know if I can answer that, because there are people who will doubt and deny there are certain conditions, like, "Ay, kalokohan
Yeah.
lang yan, mental health." I'd say they will have to deal with it by themselves, investigate for themselves. It's not that I can't change what they think. It's I hope that they would think it through before denying it. Maybe that's it. That's what I can think. Like, people just
Yeah.
instead of just saying, oh, if instead of disbelief or closed-mindedness, maybe they could listen and they would think it through. If they still don't
Yeah.
believe, fine,
Yeah.
but at least try to listen.
I
That's I
agree.
suppose I suppose that's what I can say. I believe in freedom of thought, really, and freedom of speech. You
Mm-mm.
can, but it's only through speaking and again letting it out that we know what's
Yeah.
going on, what's wrong with the what we're. I mean, I think you and I can say that we are advocates of proper mental health,
Yeah.
but we have to be critical of how whether or not the way we're talking works and spreading awareness. So we have to listen to what they're saying against us so we can also improve. So yeah, so it's, I suppose, okay, I found it. And I think this is it, it there there's it is not, nothing is absolute with mental health. So this is
Mm.
for the critics of mental health and the advocates of mental health, because sometimes there are people who treat mental health as, like, say, a get out of jail free card, or like an excuse,
Yeah.
or like the only thing happening in the world.
Yeah.
Like it's important, but we we can't always like go to therapy, we can always be medicated. So um even if there is science from the west, we kind of need to contextualize it here. So perhaps what I want to change is, nothing is absolute, but we have to discuss that,
Yeah.
all sides. We need to
Both
talk about
sides.
this, but nothing is settled, nothing is absolute.
Okay. Thank you.
Mhm.
And next, what is your ideal social environment?
Ah, would you believe that I'm not very social? I've been talking a lot, but I don't know, social environment. I suppose it's, well, number one, has the right balance of fresh air, good people, and good books, and
Yeah.
good coffee. Like, in a way, you can socialize fine, but there's enough space for you to do your own thing, touch the
Mm.
grass,
Mm. Mm.
read, drink
Just
coffee.
the right balance, no?
There's a bit of everything for everyone.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, sometimes even for introverts, it's okay to be like, if you're in a cafe with other people, that's in a way, it's, you don't feel alone, but you don't have to socialize and spend energy
Yeah.
either.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
if you
I love
choose
that
to,
feeling.
yeah, but if you choose to, they're there. So
Hmm.
yeah.
Yeah. People who don't necessarily need for you, people who you don't necessarily need to talk to, but
Yeah.
they're there when they're there.
Mhm.
They're available.
Okay.
Next, if there's anything good that has come out of your mental instability, what would it be?
Well, that presumes I have mental instability. uh no.
Or just like the simplest forms of like anxiety, or if there's
n-
anything that has come out of it, what would it
no,
be?
yeah, I completely agree. Like, I think everyone has their low points, and it's
Yeah.
quite simple. You're able to empathize with other people, even like the smallest, saddest moment. You can
Mm,
actually connect with like the deepest depths of depression.
yeah.
Maybe you can approximate it, like, just imagine this feeling, but for that person it's this much. So
Yeah.
the best thing is to you're able to empathize with anyone. I mean, not always exactly, but
Mm,
yeah, I mean, like, I think it was Stephen Colbert that said that, um it's being able, like, sometimes his fate saying it's being able to accept the things you wish never happened, and that because that happened to you, you're able to connect with people with similar pain or
yeah.
even worse pain. So that's one thing, good thing you can have for any pain whatsoever. You're able to connect with anyone, anyone's pain, and that's how we can build connections, be more human, be
Yeah.
connected.
And that's how we realize that we're all imperfect
Yeah,
and struggling to find our place in the world.
it's a beautiful thing, man.
Thank you, Matt. For
All
our
right.
last part of the podcast, we will
Okay.
have Hero You Out. This is similar to Boy Abunda's Fast Talk. So
Hmm.
I just want you to answer it as fast as you can without any explanations, and
Oh.
by not answering both.
Okay.
We don't have both as an option, okay?
Hmm.
Okay, so let's
Sure.
begin.
To
Three, two,
chocolate? No. Okay. uh, I'd say both.
would
No.
you want to
Okay, no both. Okay, go,
Uh-oh.
go, go.
Uh-oh.
All right.
The kids listening here will be like, "Oh, what?" Just kidding.
Nakakatulog ng bata. Oh, sige.
I'm bleeping that out.
All right, all
So
right.
it's okay, it's okay.
All right.
Okay, let's begin. Number one, your own mental stability or a special someone's own mental stability.
I'm
Mind
so
games?
sorry. My own. I'm
Okay.
sorry.
Okay, number two, forever socially isolated or forever socially interacting.
Oh,
The two absolutes. You have to choose only one. Only one, Matt. Only one.
ah, I suppose interactive. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay.
As an
Number
introvert.
three. Number three, a healthy social environment or a healthy self-identity.
Neither are possible without the other, but self
Mhm.
identity.
Okay. Number four, go out with friends or go out alone.
I'll go out alone.
Number five, if you could go back in time to tell your younger self something in one word, what would it be?
Oh, okay. Oh, that's hard.
I thought you've read the questions already. I'm
Yeah,
just
yeah,
kidding.
yeah. Oh, you gave.
I'm
Yeah, yeah.
just kidding.
Right. No, but it's always hard. But
You haven't really given it much thought.
no, no, no. It's still very difficult because I want to say
Oh
so
yeah.
much, but I would say
No explanations, huh? In one word.
love.
Oh, okay.
Just love. Yeah.
Wow. A very parang very deep backstory
Cheesy.
yata yan ah.
If you
Okay,
want, I can
number
tell you
six.
all over about it afterwards. Yeah.
Number six, in one word, describe mental health.
Complicated.
Number seven, in one word, describe depression.
Human.
Wow. Number eight, if you could ask any psychologist or a psychiatrist one free question, regardless of whether you have a mental
It's not
illness or
one
not,
word. Yeah.
what question would it be? Yeah, it's not one word.
Okay. How do you remain sane with all these insane? No, I mean, no. No, basically, how do you move? Well, yeah, that's we talked about this a while ago, but how do you go on with being charged with helping all these
Yeah,
damaged people? Or maybe they're not.
yeah,
Yeah, sometimes more damaged than others. So that's very important to know
yeah,
how they continue with their job, not as job, but a vocation. And
yeah,
I bet my mom would tell like it's for support of her family, but but other for the rest, how? And sometimes they don't even have their own family. Sometimes they're all alone. So
yeah.
it's important. Maybe
And
how,
sometimes they have their own problems to deal with.
exactly. So how do they do it? Yeah, how do they stay
Yeah,
alive? Yeah,
that's
how do they remain
amazing.
afloat? Yeah,
That's an amazing question.
yeah.
Matt, somewhere out there are a lot of people who are inclined in the law. There are a lot of lawyers who want to be able to provide a better mental health policy. What is your message to them?
Mm. You know, I am not exactly a lawyer, so I can't really. I and even the policy or even the studies on mental health policy are still very tentative. But what I can say is still keep an open mind, and listen. Listen to those who with these problems and those that ask them, because I think I know that the government isn't very keen on providing more stuff, especially with mental health, because it's
Mm,
expensive.
yeah.
It's expensive to pay for these mental health
And it
practitioners.
costs
Yeah,
a whole set of new resources.
yeah, and as is, there's barely any money,
Yeah.
or the resources to go around. So, um, the best you can do is again listen and but at the same time strategize, but you cannot refuse. You cannot refuse or ignore it.
Yeah.
Economize if you have to, but it is something we must deal with because it is something we all have. Not just solving people with like sometimes very damaged, but also people who can still be treated, who can still be saved, and maybe even maintaining people with good mental health.
Yeah.
Sometimes it, well, again, I'm quoting Bat like the Joker. It sometimes it takes one bad day to for it all to fall apart.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Next, somewhere out there, there's like a lot of people, a lot of youth, a lot of Filipinos who are struggling to cope with their mental health and are still skeptical about receiving psychotherapy.
Mm.
What's your message to them to help convince them improve their help seeking behavior? Not from your lenses as a political science professor,
No,
but
no.
as a human being. What's your message to them?
Mm. I mean, honestly, just do it. The worst that can happen is you actually get properly diagnosed and at least you know what to do. But if it's and so I mean it's not the end of the world and it doesn't make you less human. That makes you more human. So just do it.
Wow, okay. Thank you. Thank you. Please plug your socials and your PI podcast.
Well, thank you, Hero. This was a very lovely discussion. I appreciate it. I haven't thought of these questions in a long time, but I do think about other important questions, mostly about politics, pop culture, and
Yeah.
philosophy. I'm with my colleague and friend Anthony Borge, as he's known, at the PI podcast. When you say PI, that's Political Insights for the Palaging Inis. So it's not what you think. But
Or
maybe,
whatever you want to
yeah.
place in those asterisks.
Yes. So if the PI podcast again, you can find it on YouTube, Anchor, or Spotify. It's actually best on Spotify, but yeah, please, you can find them on the links below. But if you want to send us a personal message, we have an email at pipodcastph@gmail.com. So I can't wait to hear from you. I hope to see you in our podcast. Or
Yeah,
yeah,
wow.
thank you very
Yeah,
much.
yeah, and I feel like we've discussed about like mental health not just in the area of policy or political science, but more also on the pop culture, media,
Yeah.
yeah, no, and cinema. So
Hmm.
like we've discussed previously. Thank you, Matt. I really appreciate
Hmm.
having you here as a guest in the episode 5 of Hero Me Out, and I really appreciate it. I wish you well in the future,
Hmm.
and thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, Hero.
So once again, guys, this is Hero, your host for Hero Me Out, and I'll hero you out in the next one. Bye. Say goodbye, Matt. Say goodbye.
Bye.
Why
Oh,
why
bye.
why do
Bye
people
bye.
don't say goodbye after I say goodbye?
Okay. All right. Goodbye.
I
Goodbye.
always keep telling my guests, say goodbye, please.
I feel like a kid, you know. Bye bye.
Okay. Bye. Thank you.
All right.
La la la, hear me out. La la la, you're not alone. La la la, hear me out. La la la, you're not alone. La la la, hear me out. La la la, there's so many things that we can talk about. So hear me out.